For the record, we will never abandon Ayungin Shoal. We are committed to Ayungin Shoal. In fact, no, if we're trying to determine although it's better for China to be the one answering this, but if we wish to speculate, no, they're probably looking for weaknesses in the Philippine position, or are trying to gauge our commitment to supply our troops in the shoal. And we are here precisely to reassure the Filipino people that, as directed by our President, we are consistent with the President's directive during the SON, that we will not lose an inch of our territory.
Could you clarify this statement of the President earlier to prevent possible misinterpretation? The President mentioned during the ambush interview this morning, syempre ang posisyon, and I will quote, syempre ang posisyon ng China, sinasabi nila, quote, open quote, kami ang may-ari nito kaya pinagtanggol namin. Tayo naman sinasabing hindi, kami ang may-ari nito, kaya pinagtatanggol namin. Kaya yun ang nagiging gray area ngayon sa pinag-uusapan. Do you agree with the President that there's a gray area on that? Considering that it involves the Ayungin Shoal, which is within our EEZ?
That's one question. The other question is for our gentlemen here. Can we clarify this accusation coming from the China Coast Guard that said we are actually bringing construction materials to Ayungin? And maybe we can clarify as well if we will keep the BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal despite all these incidents.
This is the photo. This was China Coast Guard 5305 carrying out dangerous maneuver against the Philippine Coast Guard vessel 4402. So a while ago it was 4409, now it's 4402. In which by 9:44 they were successful in separating MRRB 4409 from the Green Hull charter boat. That's why, as you can see, the indigenous boat appears to be on its own, no escort. Because during this time, the Philippine Coast Guard vessel is corralled by a lot of China Coast Guard vessels. By 9:51, almost the same time that they were using water cannon against the indigenous boat Green Hull, or the Oneida May number, the Oneida May, that's also the same time that the Philippine Coast Guard was also experiencing water cannon from these two China Coast Guard vessels. China Coast Guard 4203 and China Coast Guard 5305. In shoal, they requested, that vessel requested the Philippine Coast Guard vessel to attempt once again in entering the shoal. But unfortunately, since the China Coast Guard also tapped two Chinese maritime militia vessels, besides from the 6 China Coast Guard vessels, this indigenous boat was not able to enter the Ayungin Shoal. This is the photo of the Chinese maritime militia, appearing to be Chinese fishing vessel. But in this particular operation, we can actually conclude that this Chinese fishing vessel is not just merely a fishing vessel, but a Chinese maritime militia taking orders from the Chinese Coast Guard to support their operations in blocking our resupply. Around 1 p.m., the Philippine Coast Guard vessel for BRP Cabra is still trying to escape with China Coast Guard vessels. This vessel was surrounded by 4 China Coast Guard vessels during that time. When the indigenous boat has already completed its resupply, the first resupply boat that was able to enter, we escorted them proceeding back to Sabina Shoal. And we noted that from Ayungin, although there is lesser tension, the China Coast Guard allowed us to exit Ayungin Shoal. But we noted that this China Coast Guard vessel 3302 escorted us from Ayungin going to Sabina?
The Philippines demands that China immediately stop its illegal activities in our maritime zones. The Department of Foreign Affairs is one with the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine Coast Guard in their pursuit of our shared mandate to protect and uphold our legal maritime entitlements. The DFA is making full use of our diplomatic processes and is exercising all possible action available to us, including the summoning of the Chinese ambassador over this incident. The resupply mission to and the upkeep of the BRP Sierra Madre are legitimate Philippine government activities in our country's exclusive economic zone, which are all in accordance with international law, particularly UNCLOS. As a low tide elevation, Ayungin Shoal can neither be the subject of a sovereign claim, nor is it capable of appropriation under international law, a fact affirmed by the 2016 arbitral award. China cannot, therefore, lawfully exercise sovereignty over it. China's illegal exercise of maritime law enforcement powers, interference with a legitimate Philippine rotation and resupply mission, including its aggressive use of water cannon against our vessels, and any other activity that infringes upon our sovereign rights and jurisdiction over Ayungin Shoal are violations of international. Thank you. That ends the DFA statement. We will now proceed to the open forum. To allow many journalists, as many journalists to ask different questions, we will allow each journalist one question with one follow-up. Please go direct to your question, and then, and doing so, before you start questioning, can you actually identify yourself and the media outfit that you belong to? Please, can we have the first question, please? Yes, Tristan.
Hi, good afternoon po. Ambassador Tess, maybe for the DFA. President Marcos earlier said that there's already a note verbal given to Chinese Ambassador Wang Xilian. So could you elaborate on whether we've already sent a note verbal or a diplomatic protest over this incident? Yes, ma'am. How was it?
Yes, a note verbal has actually been issued. And it was issued during the summon of the Chinese ambassador by Undersecretary Lazaro this morning. So in terms of statistics, just a while ago I mentioned in our chat that as of 7 August 2023, we had a certain number. But so as of August 7 now, at 11:30 a.m., the Philippines has filed 445 diplomatic protests since 2020. For 2023, we have filed 35 diplomatic protests. This includes the note verbal hand-delivered during the summoning of the ambassador.
So, ma'am, Foreign Affairs Secretary Enrique, si Yusek Lazaro po ang nag-handover nun.
Yusek Lazaro, allow me to give more details about the summoning of the ambassador. Yusek Lazaro conveyed to the Chinese ambassador this morning the strong protest of the Philippine government on the blocking and water cannon operation by the Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese maritime militia vessels against Philippine indigenous boats conducting regular rotation and resupply and humanitarian mission to provide food, fuel, and other basic necessities to the Philippine military personnel stationed on the BRP in Sierra Madre on Ayungin Shoal. The blocking and water cannoning incident against and around the Philippine vessels on August 5 lasted for over an hour. The Undersecretary reiterated to the Chinese side that the Ayungin Shoal is a low tide elevation that cannot be appropriated or subjected to sovereignty claims. The final and binding 12 July 2016 award in the South China Sea arbitration expressly stated that Ayungin Shoal is within the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf of the Philippines, over which the Philippines has sovereign rights and jurisdictions. The DFA further called China's attention that its actions are likewise contrary to China's flag state obligation under the 1972 International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, which requires states to take measures necessary to ensure safety at sea and prevent ship collisions. The CCG vessel's dangerous maneuvers restricted the Philippine vessel's navigational path, thereby increasing the risk of collision in violation of Rules 2, 7, and 8 of COLREGs. The DFA firmly asked China to, 1, direct its vessels to stop their illegal action against Philippine vessels and to stop interfering in legitimate Philippine activities. 2, comply with its obligation under international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS and the 2016 award and the South China Sea arbitration and the 1972 COLREGs, and adhere to its commitments under the dock. During the summon, the Philippines, through the FAA, also expressed disappointment that the DFA was unable to reach its counterpart to the maritime communication mechanism for several hours while the incident was occurring, and expressed the hope that the Chinese side will reciprocate with the same sense of urgency the communication initiated by the Philippines, as has been demonstrated by the Philippines when receiving communications initiated by the Chinese side. At the same time, I'd also like to inform that as we summoned the ambassador, our ambassador in China, in Beijing, also issued or handed a protest note to the CN Foreign Ministry as of this morning. Next question, please. We'll go this side. Celerina, please, and then
Good afternoon po. Ma'am, with these recent incidents, or anyone could answer, with the continuous bullying of China against the Philippines and this recent incident, how is the relationship between the Philippines and China now?
Okay. We value our relations with China, and we hope that they too value the relations with the Philippines. But clearly this incident undermines efforts to strengthen mutual trust and confidence, a crucial element in friendly relations among states between our countries. And it does provide tension in our bilateral relations. As we repeatedly said, the rotation and resupply mission was a routine activity conducted by the PCG and the Philippine Navy within the Philippine EEZ in line with international law, specifically UNCLOS and the Arbitral Award of 2016. UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitral Award have made clear that the Philippines exercise sovereign rights and jurisdiction on Ayungin Shoal, a low tide elevation within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. China has no right or legal basis to prevent us from exercising such sovereign rights and jurisdiction.
Follow-up, could you clarify this statement of the President earlier to prevent possible misinterpretation? The President mentioned during the ambush interview this morning, syempre ang posisyon, and I will quote, syempre ang posisyon ng China, sinasabi nila, quote, open quote, kami ang may-ari nito kaya pinagtanggol namin. Tayo naman sinasabing hindi, kami ang may-ari nito, kaya pinagtatanggol namin. Kaya yun ang nagiging gray area ngayon sa pinag-uusapan. Do you agree with the President that there's a gray area on that? Considering that it involves the Ayungin Shoal, which is within our EEZ? Anyone could answer.
No, it would be hard for us to offer our views on what the President said. No, I think it would be best if that question is answered by the Office of the President.
Next question, this side, please. Yes, we'll do it this way, yeah?
Okay na, ayan. Zen Hernandez po, ABS-CBN. Ma'am, are we going to summon the Chinese ambassador so that we can discuss this further. And of course, I would like to relay what I think the Filipino public would be asking at this point. How significant is it for us to file these diplomatic protests despite the fact that, these incidents, keeps happening?
We already summoned, the department has summoned the ambassador this morning. And what I actually recounted was what happened during the summoning of the ambassador. And the ambassador was with us in the department. Our ambassador in Beijing also called on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to actually convey in strong terms our protests against what has happened in Ayungin Shoal. The value of a note verbal is in terms of correcting narratives and in terms of protesting. Some people would say, where does that result? But it's important for us to do so. It's important for the Philippines to continually assert what is rightfully ours. To allow China to continue with its narrative will be contrary to what we are supposed to do or mandated to do. And the policy of this government is very clear. As they said, not 1 inch of our territory should actually be handed over to China.
I haven't. One question lang, ma'am. I just asked one question. The other question is for our gentlemen here. Can we clarify this accusation coming from the China Coast Guard that said we are actually bringing construction materials to Ayungin? And maybe we can clarify as well if we will keep the BRP Sierra Madre in Ayungin Shoal despite all these incidents. That's it.
Just to address the question about the diplomatic protests, I think it is very important for the Philippines to continue filing these diplomatic protests, no matter what the reaction of China is. The diplomatic protests are for purposes of putting on record our continuing objection to what the Chinese are doing. The moment we stop issuing these diplomatic protests, it can be construed by China and the international community as an abandonment of our position. So this government, in particular the Department of Foreign Affairs, will continue to file these diplomatic protests, even if it runs into the hundreds, because precisely by doing so, we are reaffirming our commitment to the Philippine position that it is that the Ayungin Shoal and all other features which we occupy is our part of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. We exercise sovereign rights and jurisdiction over those features. As to the second question, sorry, can you repeat the question? Okay. When we do resupply missions, and I will ask our colleagues here to also add to this, no? When we do resupply missions, we are exercising our rights, no, under international law. Because as mentioned, we have a permanently stationed Philippine commissioned vessel, Navy vessel in Ayungin Shoal. Okay? So when we do supply, we provide them with what is necessary for the maintenance of the LS-57. So we provide food, we provide everything, provisions, no? Irrespective of what China says. It is our right to bring whatever is necessary to maintain the station and to ensure that our troops there are properly provisioned. So let me give the floor to the other members of the panel.
Based on the report provided to us, these are supplies that are needed by our people there to make sure that they have food to eat, water to drink, and other supplies needed.
Yes, ma'am. Cecil Morelia of the French News Agency. Sir, according to your account, that the Chinese have been turning the screw, so to speak. First they shadow us, and then they hit us with water cannon. They try to ram us, and at one point they used military-grade laser, as you described it last February. What is the end goal of the Chinese government on Ayungin Shoal and Sabina Shoal, do you think? And is there anything practically that we can do to stop them from achieving that? May I ask Commodore Tariela to answer first?
I'm sorry, sir, but those questions doesn't fall for the Philippine Coast Guard to respond. I think those questions are not for the Philippine Coast Guard to respond, ma'am.
May I ask the others?
Okay. I think that question is better directed to China. I cannot speak for China.
Yes, I echo the sentiment raised by Colonel Aguilar. I think the end goal of China is for China to actually explain. And for us, the Philippines, is to prepare for any eventuality.
Are we gonna build there if we lose our nerve and abandon the outpost?
Okay. For the record, we will never abandon Ayungin Shoal. We are committed to Ayungin Shoal. In fact, if we're trying to determine although it's better for China to be the one answering this, but if we wish to speculate, they're probably looking for weaknesses in the Philippine position, or are trying to gauge our commitment to supply our troops in the shoal. And we are here precisely to reassure the Filipino people that, as directed by our President, we are consistent with the President's directive during the SON, that you will not lose an inch of our territory.
Hello, Mara Cepeda from the Straits Times. A few days ago, China actually even offered to hold joint patrols in the West Philippine Sea to the military. How does this latest incident and their blatant disregard for our sovereignty play into the decision of the military and the Philippine government in general in considering the offer of China, which is something that's quite ridiculous given their actions there? Are we still going? Does this incident in a way affect? Is there a decision already? Will a joint patrol? Does a joint patrol with China even make sense in the West Philippine Sea?
It was just an informal discussion. I don't know if it's even worth to be discussed here. Second, we cannot make a decision on that issue. Third, I think you can ask the people, the Filipino people, on the reaction.
Hi, sirs. I'm Camila Lamia from the New York Times. For the gentleman here, I'd like to ask, when it comes to the RORE missions, we're seeing more and more of Chinese vessels, Chinese maritime militia vessels. Are we planning to deploy more vessels, if that's even possible, or to increase the frequency of our RORE in Ayungin Shoal specifically?
We have already increased the number of our assets in that area for the conduct of maritime patrols and, of course, to do RORE missions.
Sir,
As to what we will do exactly, that we cannot tell you for security reasons.
Sir, ilang vessels na po yung dinagdag, and also maybe
Again,
the WPS?
that question, ma'am, I'm sorry, is I cannot answer because there are security considerations.
Hi, Sir. Sandra po, GMA7. Sir, there are opinions that the Ayungin situation is already a blockade against the military. So what is your response to that, and what are we going to do? And also, does this already warrant any help or assistance from the U.S.?
Okay, let me answer the first part of the question and let me refer to DFA on the second part of the question. I think the incidents at Ayungin Shoal last Saturday speaks for itself. No? The increased number of Coast Guard vessels, the movement in concert with the Chinese maritime militia, which effectively proves to the whole world that they are instruments of the Chinese Coast Guard or the Chinese Navy, or the Chinese government. That these Chinese militia vessels are not disinterested participants or innocent individuals just who happen to be there. No, this was a concerted effort, as mentioned by Commodore Tariela, a concerted effort wherein our ships were effectively corralled. No, so this was like a David versus Goliath situation, because there were only 2 Coast Guard vessels and 2 Philippine supply boats against 6 large Chinese Coast Guard vessels and 2 Chinese militia vessels and more People's Liberation Army naval vessels at near proximity to the area. So technically, no, this looks like a blockade of the Ayungin Shoal, okay? Because the facts on the ground, as can be seen by everyone through the videos and the photos that we have shown today, clearly showed the increased deployment of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels. I think the most number, tama ba, Commodore? The most number in recent memory. Okay. As to the second question, may I turn over to the DFA?
Does this warrant already any help or assistance from the U.S. under the U.S. RPUS Mutual Defense Treaty?
Well, the United States has actually publicly affirmed in its statement and in various statements and at the highest level that it has ironclad commitment to the defense of the Philippines pursuant to the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951. And here we deal with the concept of what constitutes an armed attack in the Pacific. But there is no clear definition as to what defines public vessels in the MDT, and there are ongoing negotiations on it. In terms of your specific question, whether it warrants the invoking of the mutual defense, I think it's a bit early.